Beijing holds a full hand of cards which they can play out depending on what Trump does. So they're holding their hand back. There's more to come. China's economy is on the mend. China's stock market will be very volatile, but the trend will be up. And they are prepared for anything that Trump and others want to throw at them.
You're watching Capital Cause, and my name is Danny. Today's guest is Simon Hunt. Simon, thank you for coming back on.
Hi, nice to be on again.
Yeah, it's
Thank
good to have you
for
back
having
on.
me.
Yeah, let's just dive right in, Simon. What is front and center for you right now? What is occupying your headspace? What is top of the radar screen for you?
The simple answer to that fundamental question is, where is the world heading? Is it heading towards peace and prosperity, or are we heading towards very complex, difficult times interspersed with geopolitics leading us into wars?
Yeah, where does it appear to be heading? Where are we leaning towards?
I would like to say we are not heading into wars, but my instincts and knowledge indicates that the risk of war is very large. And I think that the Middle East could be the precursor of a bigger war, because Israel is now rather like a caged lion. Its war with Hamas is not going as well as being made out to be. The West Bank tensions are rising. Hezbollah, again, contrary to what the media is telling you, is being given a bloody nose by Hezbollah. Israel's attack on Iran caused no serious damage at all. And in fact, and again, according to local sources and those knowledgeable about the region, what actually happened was when Israel's first wave of F-35, etc., approached Iran, they got locked on by Russia's sophisticated electronic jamming equipment and basically turned tail. And there was a supposed to have been a follow-up with conventional bombers. They were aborted. So what is Israel going to do next? Iran is saying that they are going to hit severely Israel any day now. The comprehensive agreement between Russia and Iran will be signed in Moscow, which covers, if one country is attacked, the other comes to its rescue. Why has America sent a fleet of B-52 bombers to Qatar? Why is an Israeli frigate or destroyer, I don't know which, apparently armed with ballistic missiles, having sailed through the Suez Canal and is apparently now in the Red Sea? Something is up. So I think that probably it will happen next year.
Mm.
The region is going to explode. And will that lead to some bigger conflict? Because China and Russia will, if necessary, come to Iran's assistance. But it may not be necessary because Iran has the missile technology, which it showed on its two hits on Israel, which were not done to destroy anything, only to send a message that they can penetrate the dome and America's defense systems. So, I mean, I'm not a betting person, but if I had to bet, it's even money that next year the region is going to explode.
What does the election result change in all of this? Does it change the chessboard at all, given that Trump's won?
Of course, a lot will depend on who's going to be in the cabinet, particularly Secretary of State and Defense. But given Trump's affiliations with Israel, I don't think it changes what might happen in the region. I think there is a possibility that NATO's war over Ukraine with Russia, there is a possibility of change there. But I think any treaty will only be on Russian terms. Because what Russia, doesn't matter who is the president, they no longer have any trust in America or what NATO says. But their biggest concern is they do not want any NATO UK stroke US missiles within hitting distance of Moscow or St. Petersburg. So my own personal bet, I emphasize my personal bet, is that Russia will want control over all of Ukraine.
All of it, not just the Donbass.
Yeah, because otherwise you can have NATO missiles on their border. That's exactly what they don't want.
But then couldn't you make the case that if they put missiles on Poland, then if they acquire Ukraine, then that would technically be on their border as well?
It's going to be interesting to see the position of the Polish government and who is going to be their government. I mean, I know from friends in Poland that there is a push for a change. So we just have to see. But I think Ukraine, there's more chance of some peaceful ending to the Ukraine war than there is in the Middle East.
That does appear so. Putin's come out recently and said that he'd be open to opening talks with Trump, and that
of course he'd say that.
Yeah.
I mean, both of them got on so well in the Helsinki 2016 meeting. It was only when they came out and said, shaking hands, and as I was told by a friend who was around there, basically they had a love-in. Problem now is that Congress and the Senate are so anti-Russia, Trump cannot seem to be giving in to Putin.
It's an interesting relationship because Trump and Putin, that is, because on the Putin side, he is allied with Iran, and Iran is on the naughty
Exactly.
list with Trump,
Exactly.
and vice versa. So it's
And just,
it's half a dozen on one hand, six on the other.
yeah. And just to add to the confusion, Putin is being pushed by his people, not just the population, but the people around him, to be much tougher against NATO. I mean, NATO has been attacking Russian military depots and oil refineries. I mean, the last I count it was 29 they'd been hit. Now, prior to the BRICS summit in Kazan, I think that Putin deliberately turned a blind eye because he didn't want any strong retaliation to disrupt the meeting.
Mm-hmm.
That meeting has ended. So, are we going to be in for a tougher period?
That's the $64,000 question.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I guess we'll see. It's not looking too good so far for the personnel side of the new administration. If things pan out the way that they are, they're talking about Pompeo as Secretary of Defense, potentially Rubio as Secretary of State. So it appears it's going to have a significant neocon presence. So, I mean, I guess we'll see what happens in January of next year.
Yeah, as I said, to start with, it all depends who's going to hold the big positions in the cabinet.
Mm-hmm. Well, how does this impact the markets and the economy, though? We did see a huge rally on the first day after the election, and now it's kind of simmered down a bit. Yesterday was FOMC meeting. The Fed has decided to cut another 25 basis points. How are things looking like market wise and economically speaking?
I, as I see things, the consumer is on the point of being tapped out. Look at what's happening with credit cards. And I suspect that a lot of the stats that the BLS and the government has been issuing in the last 6 months are not reflecting reality on the ground. So I think that early next year, as the revisions start coming in, we're actually going to see a much weaker economy. And I think that with global tensions continuing to rise, the first few months of any government can always have disarray, can always produce disarray. So I think that for the first 9 months of next year or so, I think there's going to be a very difficult economic environment. So after the ebullition that we've seen in all stock markets, or nearly all stock markets, I think we're going to have a big correction in the first half of next year.
Mm.
I mean, plus 10%, maybe as much as 20. And then, of course, we'll get what Trump wants to do, being pushed into the economy, tax cuts, etc. And the US economy will take off later in 2025 and through 2026 and maybe into early 2027. We'll see new highs in equity markets. On the other side of the Atlantic, Europe is in complete disarray. Change of government in Germany is probable. We have a very weak and Marxist type government in the UK. The UK, as in America, but possibly more so, crime, killings, even in central London. And friends of mine say, don't bet against the possibility that within a short period of time, that the military won't be patrolling the streets.
Wow.
Yeah. So I think,
In London or all
it's
the?
yeah,
Is this
yeah,
primarily London?
yeah.
Hmm.
I mean, I've not been to London for 4 years, thank goodness. But I'm told if you walk down Park Lane, you'll see immigrant tents all along the side.
Hmm.
I think equity markets in Europe are not investment opportunities. You trade them economically, going nowhere, but downhill.
So we might
I
see
was
some weakness.
talking to a Spanish friend of mine here in Dubai, whose father runs a big industry in northern Spain, private sector. My friend was telling me the government is simply not encouraging the private sector at all. Taxes, everything. And then to crown it all, the floods that came into Valencia and spilled over into Costa del Sol, the government has deliberately lied to the population, turned off all media so that they don't know the truth. But the truth is, it's over 2,000 people have been killed, and nothing has been done to support them. So I think that maybe Italy and Portugal are safer havens, but Central Europe, no. France is in a complete mess. I mean, turmoil.
What are the odds that we see an uprising in Europe?
I think that's already started. You saw it when the farmers revolted against Brussels' new taxes and telling the farmers how they should farm. The farmers rose up. Go through history, it's always been the peasants who started revolutions. So I think we're in that early stage. It wasn't just the French farmers, it was the German farmers, it was the Dutch farmers. Now you've got, with this new inheritance tax in the UK, farmers are revolting.
And I think someone like Macron is kind of sniffing this out. Just recently, he commented that the Americans had elected Donald Trump because they wanted to make America great again. But then he said, well, who's making Europe great? We need to look after our own interests. So he seems to kind of be trying to hitch his wagon to make Europe great again kind of appeal. I don't think it's going to work. I mean, he's a aristocrat if there ever was one.
To make Europe again, you've got to go through a major crisis.
Mm-hmm.
well, the major crisis, of course, can be war. In a war, you default on your debt.
What are the odds that the United States exits their position in Ukraine and just leaves Europe with the hot potato to deal with it?
I think that is a good possibility. What then? Because what Russia will want its own terms, and I said before, its own terms are its security. Does that lead to NATO less America going to war with Russia?
Hey guys, quick pause. As you know, we are big proponents of physical gold and silver on this channel. However, the conundrum often arises, where do you put it? Do you put it in an above ground safe where it becomes a target for burglars, intruders, etc.? Or do you bury it underground? This is where Dirty Man Safe comes in. This is a very simplified solution if you want to bury your gold or silver, or actually any valuables underground, whether it be alternative car keys, house keys, paperwork, legal documents, anything that's important to you, you can put in this bad boy right here. Let's go ahead and take a look at how it works. All right, so you're gonna start off by digging a hole underground, sticking the tubular module in with the safe inside. You bury your valuables, and then whenever you want to extract it, boom, there it is. There's a string attachment. You just pull it out, bada bing, bada boom. Check it out here. You have 3 different sizes, the girl safe, the man safe, and the old man safe, depending on how much you want to store in this thing. It's all about distribution. You want to diversify where you put your valuables. You don't want to just put them all in one place. And for more information, also click the link down below and get your 15% off discount. All right, guys, let's get back to the video. What do you make of these North Korean troops having a presence in Russia now?
That's a whole lot of BS.
Okay.
Total BS. Historically, what happens is they share a long border. North Korean troops go to eastern Siberia for training with Russian troops. That's all it is. It was a false flag deliberately created, probably by Putin and the intelligence services, in order to say, look, Russia's got North Koreans coming to attack us. You better come in NATO and attack them.
Attack.
I mean, just think about it. Think of the language problems.
Yeah, exactly. So we've talked about the economy, and the takeaways were expect a 10 to 20% correction in the economy sometime in early 2025. But once Trump gets in, expect his policies to usher in another big rally in the markets. On the European side, it's all grim. There doesn't appear to be any.
Yeah, there'll be a rally, but it's not one that I would like to participate in. Because I think fundamentally Europe is in a complete mess, and it's going to require a crisis to get out of that mess.
And
the other
price
part
of gold.
Of the equation, of course, is China.
What about China?
Well, I think China's economy has been recovering in the last, where are we now, November, last couple of months. The government, they introduced back in September a monetary stimulus. Today they announced a fiscal stimulus, which is basically revolves around a package of 10 trillion RMB, 6 trillion in special bonds spread equally over 3 years to take debt off the balance sheet onto the budget, and another 4 trillion for the same purpose will be spread over 5 years. I mean, as a Chinese friend said to me, Beijing holds a full hand of cards which they can play out depending on what Trump does. So they're holding their hand back. There's more to come, at least 2 trillion. But what a lot of people don't seem to understand is that what that first tranche of 6 trillion, 2 trillion a year, does, it allows local governments to start projects that have been infrastructure projects that have been put on hold. Thus, you get the leveraged impact. You employ people, they get pay packets, money to spend again. And the second part of it is a lot of the local governments have not been able to pay their employees. Now they will be able to. So I think that China's economy is on the mend. China's stock market will be very volatile, but the trend will be up. And they are prepared for anything that Trump and others want to throw at them. I mean, I know from different people that actually they have been making contingency plans in case there is a war, such as many private sector companies have had to allocate floor space for the PLA to produce goods and components.
There's been talk that China's been getting ready to invade Taiwan for a while now. What are the chances that they actually pull the trigger anytime soon?
I would say the chances are virtually nil unless America overtly sends large packages of offensive military equipment into Taiwan, and even boots on the ground. There is a US contingent, and I've forgotten the name of the island, which is just only a few kilometers off the coast of China. American troops training Taiwanese troops on that island.
You had this big ceremony a couple of weeks back where Xi Jinping announced to his military to prepare for war.
Yeah.
Is that just, is there any meat to the bone to that, or is that just simply bluster?
No, I think there are meats to the bone. It's basically saying if NATO comes to attack us, we are prepared.
NATO?
Well, NATO via America.
Yeah.
However, well, I mean, the fear in Beijing is that NATO is now reaching out to Asia.
That is true. Yeah. I mean, they even floated the idea of adding in South Korea into the fold at one point.
Yeah. I mean, I think anything can happen.
Yeah. So what does this spell for the price of gold? Obviously, all this tension is jet fuel for gold. Gold sold off after the election. Now it's kind of it's kind of corrected back up. Well, not entirely back to its 2750 levels before the election, but it's at 2700 at the time of this recording. What do you make of gold right now?
It's a good question. Gold is coming back into the monetary system with BRICS. A very astute guy called Luke Groman made the following comment. BRICS are recycling their surpluses into their own countries, i.e. real assets, and net surpluses into gold. The BRICS capital account is open on a limited basis via gold, and the higher gold goes, the more open the BRICS capital accounts will be. But it's deeper than that. It's going to take some years before BRICS can develop their own currency. But in the meantime, what happens, so I'm told, is that, let's take China and Russia as the example. Russia has a big trade surplus with China. There is lodged in the PBOC an amount of physical gold that is enough to cover that surplus.
Mm.
So indirectly, gold is coming back into the system. And I suspect that that will happen within all BRICS member and partner countries.
Right. And it's not just gold. Russia just announced they would be starting their own silver reserve as well.
Yep.
What does that, I mean, what does that portend to?
Higher silver prices.
Are we starting to see silver come back as a monetary metal, or is it more of a stockpile from an industrial standpoint?
I think the trend is bigger than that. I think that the trend, I mean, not necessarily for today, tomorrow, this year, or next year, but the long-term trend is to hold physical assets and not financial assets.
Mm-hmm. And who owns all the physical collateral? It's all the BRICS countries.
Yeah.
Europe doesn't have any physical collateral.
I mean, I quote an example. I think the day will come when China will say our currency is supported by the gold which our citizens own, which is around 25,000 tons. You can then say, what supports the US dollar? It's debt.
It's warships, guns, it's bombs.
Well, being blunt, their war equipment dates back to the Second World War. They don't have the missile technology and the way that modern wars are being fought, that Iran and Russia are fighting.
Even after we spend like all this money on defense, like defense is the biggest line item on the budget.
Well, I think that's something that Trump is going to get his head around.
I see. What assets are bullish in this environment aside from gold and silver?
Sorry, say that again.
What assets tend to benefit in this environment aside from gold and silver?
Again, looking at a 5-10 year trend, property, real estate, make sure you've got your food supply, make sure that you can be independent of the national electricity grid by having one of these generating sets. So ensure that you are actually self-contained and not dependent upon any government or government source.
And geographically speaking, what are some of the hotspots do you think that are going to take hold? Obviously, Europe is one, but what are some of the others?
Middle East. I think that in all developed countries, I think populations are going to become difficult to control.
And what will that result?
Yeah.
What'll happen then? Do we see a police state?
Well, I think that my take is that the world needs a major crisis in order to go back to its basics. Productivity, not debt, that government gets out of the equation instead of the population depending wholly on the government. But it requires a crisis. And I think that in the early 2030s, that is when we're going to go back to the sort of world that we did know 20, 30 years ago. And then you will have global GDP rising, returning to the rises that we saw between 1900 and 2020. It was 4% a year.
We've got to go through
but
the crisis,
driven not by debt, but driven by equity and productivity.
Right.
And where is the growth going to come from? The growth is going to come from Southeast Asia, Africa, basically the BRICS.
Africa. We haven't heard much of Africa. Why do you say Africa?
I think Africa is now where Southeast Asia was 20 years ago.
Interesting. What specific states or regions in Africa?
Africa has got all the agriculture resources
and minerals
that the world needs. So instead of the colonial empires taking the profits out of Africa, I think the way that BRICS is being developed, they will be pushed back into Africa.
Interesting. But until we get there, I want to get to your comments really quick before we sign off on the FOMC meeting we had yesterday. A quarter, 25 basis point cut in the Fed funds rate. And Powell made some interesting comments. When he was asked whether or not he would resign if Trump asked him to, he said no, kind of defiantly. How do you anticipate the Fed maneuvers in a Trump administration? How do you think their relationship will go? Even though he was the one who actually appointed him.
Well, I think the key signal to watch is what long rates are doing. I don't think it's short rates that matter.
The long rates going off.
What are the banks going to do? Okay, the Fed has dropped rates first 50 basis points, now 25 basis points. Have the banks eased up? I don't think so. There's the long rates that we've got to focus on.
Yep. That seems to be the case. The 10 years ripping higher, regardless of what the Fed does.
Exactly. And the Fed has very limited control over long rates. The market does. If the market senses rising inflation, then for sure, long rates are going to rise. I mean, I keep going back to what we saw late 1960s to 1982. And if you look at a chart that tracks US CPI in that period and today, it's just tracking absolute, the correlation is exact. So if we carry on like that, then we've got short term a little bit further to go down over the next few months. Then we rise sharply into probably, where are we now? Late 2026, early 2027, when we will see US CPI going over 13%. And in 1980, 81, what did 10-year treasuries yield? 15.8%. So in my scenario, we're heading towards rising inflation, long-term money yielding well over 10%. And what does that do to a highly leveraged system?
That's a massive headwind to the stock market.
Yeah.
Why would you invest in stocks when you just get 10%? All right. Well, I think that's all I got here, Simon. Anything you want to talk about?
No, for me, it's time for a drink.
All right. I think I'm going to go get my coffee in a second. But hey, thank you so much for coming on, Simon. Where can people find you?
Yeah, thank you for asking. Simon-Hunt.com.
All right. We'll have the link to that down below. Be sure to check it out, guys. And if you enjoyed this video, give us a like. If you agreed with what we had to say, with what Simon had to say, write "Go Simon Go" in the comments section. Also, check out our Substack, capitalcosm.substack.com, to support us there, and subscribe to this channel to keep getting videos like this and helping this channel grow so we can keep getting more guests like Simon on the show. And if you disagreed with anything we said, drop me a comment. I do read the comments. So if there's anything that you disagreed with that you want me to know or hear, I'm really interested to get your thoughts. So
probably everything I've said.
Yeah, we'll leave it down below, guys. Write your essays down below. I do read them. All right. Well, I'll catch you in the next episode. Bye, guys.
Okay. Cheers. Cheers, Danny.